So, thanks so much for joining me today, Parvinder. I'm so excited to chat with you. What is, when you signed up to chat today, what was the main challenge that you have around your relationship with food? And what is your goal that you would like to walk away with? Or, like, what's the outcome you're hoping to walk away with from today?
Wow, that's a pretty heavy question. I would say, like my relationship with food, it's not like completely good or completely bad or anything like that. Like I do, eat pretty balanced meals. But yes, sometimes I emotionally eat as well. It's more to so basically at this point in my life, I'm like at my heaviest, right? Like I've never been like this heavy before. So it's like a lot of life changes have happened. For example, I just got married in November of this past year. And
Congratulations.
I'm Thank you so much. And I made the move to the US from Toronto, Canada. So it's been like so much of like big life changes and not to like I've always been on like the heavier kind of side. Again, heavy is different for everyone. But like for me, like, of course, like I don't feel as confident and we want to, start thinking about having kids soon. So basically, like I want to be healthy, I don't mean like I have to be a size 0 or anything like that. I don't consider that healthy. I do have a nutrition background myself as well. Um, However, I feel like just how like therapists need other therapists, I feel like nutritionists also need other nutritionists, right? Like I feel like, if I'm not super like or if I'm not feeling like healthy or confident within myself, how will I be able to guide other people, right? So I have to find that within myself, so I don't know if there's like one point that I can discuss, to be honest, to take away from today. It's really hard. Uh, yeah, I've always been a person, I don't believe in, I've never been a believer in like, the fad diets or anything like that because I don't think it works. I have a very holistic approach myself. That's why when I saw, basically whatever information that you had up on Meetup, I was like, okay, this resonates because I think everything is connected, like the food you put into your body, your exercise, your mind, stress, sleep, all of that is connected. If one or two are off, it's not going to be easy, right? And we are living in such like high stress times, I feel. So it is hard. Like for me, it's really easy to gain weight and then it is harder to lose. But if I'm consistent, like with my workouts and stuff, it is like I do lose it, but like a mix. And I've just been having hard time being consistent. Like that's my problem.
Mhm.
Like I know that okay, I want to be healthier. I want to like, be better focused and all of that. But like I was reading your page about you that section and it's like I kind of feel like that. Like it's like I know, but I'm always like, "Oh, I'll do it tomorrow or I'll go, I'll go into the gym and I'll go like couple of days and then I'll start the weekend will roll in and then it's like oh or like one or the other. So, yeah, I don't know if I hit one point or not. I was kinda all over the place.
No, it's helpful. I think one of the main things that you shared that is not uncommon that I find is
Mhm,
that when we go through a big transition, or it doesn't even
mhm,
have to be a big transition, but just transitions in general can really throw
mhm,
off our eating, our consistency, our where people feel like they are lacking willpower or discipline. It's not
mhm,
uncommon for that to happen because a lot of times with transitions, there's a lot of uncertainty. And it seems like you've been through a lot of life transitions all at once. Um,
yes.
and
Uh-huh.
so a lot of our like patterns around food can shift during those times, and we can fall back into some patterns or behaviors that we've been in the past.
Mhm,
So I guess if we think about one area to kind of like focus on, and typically when I'm working with people, it's not like we're focusing on, we don't start with just like focusing on one area, but I do want to try to see if we can um, get a little bit of clarity, maybe some relief around like one thing that is really driving some of the lack of like where you feel like you're not being as consistent.
Mhm,
So if we were to pick one area with like your health, your weight, your food, eating, anything, where what
mhm.
would do you feel like would have the biggest impact if you could shift it?
If I could shift it, I think probably definitely, both my weight as well, and I think just better, like, mental focus, I guess, I would say. Yeah.
What I guess what area do you feel like is causing the most amount of stress in your life right now?
Oh, just being consistent. Like, I feel like in, like, every part, like, it's, yeah, just finding, like, that consistency in everything, I think that's what it is.
Do you feel
Mhm,
like before moving to the US and getting married and stuff, when do you
mhm.
feel like that consistency kind of started to shift?
Um, I mean, like, I was doing really well, like, I did lose a of course, because I was getting married, so I did lose, I think I went, like, a size or, like, 2 sizes down, and then now I've kinda gained all of it back because, after you get married, it's all of that, and in our culture, there's a lot of, like, welcome dinners, kind of, so I'm going to a lot of that, so I would say when did that I don't know. It's I guess up until I was married. I was getting married because there was so much stress with planning everything. Mhm,
Typically, when we are feeling out of like we're not being as consistent and are feeling maybe you didn't use these words, but like if you're feeling like there's areas where you're feeling out of control or just feel like you don't have as much control over
mhm,
your food, weight, eating, relationship with food, any of those areas, any of those things, a lot of times it comes the way I look at it is like this lack of consistency and not lack of, but like the inconsistency, I guess, is
right,
often a symptom of a way that we are actually trying to protect ourselves. And when I say protection, it's not necessarily like physical protection where we feel at risk or at threat. It's more of like an emotional protection where we either feel like our sense of belonging is at risk or
mhm,
and it can be either a real or a perceived risk as well. So when we dive into a lot of this stuff, a lot of times when I'm looking at how how some of these habits are showing up, it's more looking at it as a symptom as opposed to a reason as a reason for as like the reason that you're not consistent or even the habit. Like that's more of a symptom that there's something else
uh-huh,
going on.
okay,
Is there so when you said that you tend to like during the week you tend to be on track and then the weekends come up. Is are the weekends the times where it seems like the consistency kind of falls by the wayside or is there a time of day that you notice that tends to come up the most?
definitely the weekends because it's kind of like, that's when you're kinda, like, out of schedule then, and you're kind of, like that's when we're either going to, like, my in-laws' house or there's, like, a dinner or we're going out somewhere, so, you don't have, like, your day to day in a way, um so, yeah, I would say that's why.
And so it's when it feels is it when you're not in routine, it sounds like is
Mhm.
when that comes up the most. Um, what is it? about in a lot of those cases, like you don't necessarily, I'm guessing you don't have complete say or control or can't necessarily plan in advance for what's to come. Is that one of the things that kind of feels like,
Yeah, sometimes, yes, and that can happen in the week too, right? Like something comes up or like, or there's like some sort of an appointment, last minute appointment or something like that. So yeah, or a lot of the times when I'm on my period, like that week, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to the gym. I already know that. Like that week is set aside, right? Or just sometimes I just get lazy. I'll be like, okay, I'll go, but then it's like, um so, yes, I do try to stay like, I try to stay consistent. I have a online kind of a trainer, um, through my gym. So that's been really helpful where because they're able to keep me accountable, and then, you know, it just it is helpful that way.
Mhm.
Mhm.
uh, yeah, accountability can be helpful for sure to have somebody looking like to um, check in with and stuff like that. And when um, when you feel like you're not being as consistent, what are some of the things that you either tell yourself or if there's any like judgments you have about yourself when you feel like you're not being consistent? What are some of those that come up?
Of course, like, "Oh, you're lazy," right? Like, "Oh, I'm so lazy," or there's that guilt, the shame around that. Um, or yeah, or if I start eating something unhealthy, definitely an emotional eater for sure. Um, yeah, I would say those for sure. And then you sometimes just, start think like you basically, you think one thought and then that can lead to another thought and another thought. Yeah.
And so do those thoughts tend to come up even when you are going to like some of the welcome dinners and some of the things that like the obligations that you have on the weekends, or is that more when you're in like the emotional eating state? And does the emotional eating happen in some of those um, events as well?
Um, I think it can, like sometimes it may, right? Because like I'll start comparing myself to like other people or, it's always been kind of like that just because like it was kind of I grew up being like the only girl in the family. I have two younger brothers, and then I've always been kind of on like I would say on the chubbier side, right? So my mom was always like she's very fit for her age. She always has been. So there was a lot of that, like, oh, oh, don't eat that or don't eat that. Like even if I was about to grab something, like she'd be like, no, don't eat that. And I'll be like, you do understand that I am a nutritionist as well, right? Like I do like work with people. Like it's not that like I don't completely know, I do know. So um which kind of like makes you feel like it makes me question myself like mm, mm, I don't know how to explain it, like it's like it makes you question your own self as in like am I even capable enough,
Mhm.
um yeah.
So
Sorry.
no, no, it's
Yeah.
fine. It's not uncommon to get emotional as we're talking through some of this stuff.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
um, I'm comfortable with emotion. So if you need
Right.
to take a break to grab a tissue or anything like that,
Hmm. Hmm.
feel free. And just know that just it's okay to allow anything to come up that does come up.
Right. Mhm. But, like, is that normal? Like, is there other people who are, like, in, like, these fields or even, like, coaches? Like, have they gone through stuff like that too? Or am I the only one, like, questioning myself, Like, I always wonder about that, like, yeah. I
Yeah,
guess I'm
no,
asking for validation here, just yeah.
you are not alone for sure. I
Mhm.
Many of my clients, even if they're not in the industry, they feel the same way, and I'm going to explain why that comes up. in a second. Also, from myself, I can share that I went through my own relationship with food and struggled with my weight from the age of 12
Mhm.
and would do all the diets and lose weight, gain it all back plus more, and um, lost 60 pounds in 2008. And even though I
Wow.
had lost the weight and knew what to do and was maintaining the weight, I I had been working in advertising, was looking into another career outside of advertising, and found health coaching. So I started to get my certification. And as I was getting my certification, I was like, woo, more information. Now I'll be able to stick with it and it's going to create relief and I will no
Mhm.
longer have issues around food. That did not happen. I ended up gaining a little bit more weight while I was getting my certification, but I was also introduced to a health coach more
Mhm.
from like a business perspective and understanding her journey as a health coach and like how she's gotten into the industry and all of that.
Mhm.
As I was talking to her from a business perspective, I learned about her program and process called Truce with Food.
Mhm.
And at that time, even though at that point I had been maintaining my weight for about 4 or 5 years, I was doing what I call working the system, where I'd eat well for a while, then say, screw it, eat whatever I wanted, gain weight back,
Right.
have to
Mhm.
rein it back in and lose the weight. So I started working with her to go through Truce with Food and learn more about my relationship with food. And I wanted to share that because I still work with her today on and off.
Mhm.
I think it's, especially when we have our own business or when we're in the self development world, I think it's not uncommon for us to have like imposter syndrome or to question, especially if we feel like we have challenges in some of the areas that we're helping our clients. It's not uncommon to feel like, who can I really help other people because
Yeah.
I'm
Mhm.
having struggles. So kudos to you for reaching out for support. And it's
Yeah. Mhm.
not uncommon. I feel
Okay,
like
good
lots
to
of
know.
coaches have
Yeah.
coaches, and sometimes we need support because when we're in our own stuff, it's really hard to be able to step back and to
Mhm.
see our own stuff, which is
Right.
why people hire us too, right? Because
Mhm.
that's what we're there, is to be like the guide on the side, to be able to help guide people through stuff. And it can be really challenging to do that for ourselves sometimes, even when we know what to do.
Right. Mhm. I've also been on like a pretty much kind of like a healing journey for, let's say, now about the past 3 years. So I've done a lot of work on myself, and it's taught me a lot to, do like inner child healing and that kind of stuff too. And through that, like I've looked at, when I look at my pictures from, at over the years, I look at them and I'm like, oh, it makes me so sad. I remember one day I cried so much because I was like, you were just fine. Like, you were just fine. Like you looked so good. Yet you still felt that, I will use the word fat because that's what I've always felt, even though I was just fine, like compared to, and I know we shouldn't compare. And, that's not what we like, that's what we tell our clients, right? It's not about just the physical, right? But then I did that to myself, right?
Mhm.
So when I look back at those pictures, I was like, wow, you were just fine. You were like just, I don't know what that word is. Yeah, I guess like you were being so like negative to yourself, all these years. And then I think about it, like I do need to be kinder to myself, and I go through that now too. But then again, it's like still look at yourself and you're like, oh, my belly or this part or that part. So
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know.
So I want to share, because what you're talking about, a lot of what you're talking about is actually protective, even though it doesn't necessarily feel protective. Um, and I'll explain that as I talk through this unconscious cycle that we're often in when we feel like we're not being consistent, are falling off track, are lacking willpower, however it shows up for us, or in that emotional eating.
Right.
So it starts with a trigger. And there are four common triggers that trip off the cycle, which are to feel tired. And tired can be emotional or physical depletion,
Hmm.
feeling anxious, And with anxiety often comes a level of uncertainty because we don't learn how to deal with uncertainty. It shows up as anxiety in our bodies. Feeling inadequate. And even
Mm.
though we may not feel inadequate in all areas of our life, there may be certain places or projects or circumstances where we feel like we're not good enough or not enough. And
Right.
then feeling lonely. Even when
Mhm.
we've got a great support system around us, we can still feel isolated, alone, or lonely. Well, I guess I'll pause for a second there and see if you have, if any of those triggers resonate with you.
Yes. I think all of them at one way or another.
That's not uncommon either. So just so you know.
Uh-huh.
Um, and yeah, and they can show up at different times of the day, but a lot of times, because it's not just one big thing that leads us to eat or to not be consistent, it doesn't, it can be a buildup of a lot of things that come up throughout the day or over time that kind of like
Mhm.
wear us down. And like, I think of it like as a nail file almost, where it's like filing us down to the point where it's like, who cares? Or I deserve this, however it shows up. From the trigger, we have a story. And the story was created earlier in our lives when we didn't have the full context of what was happening around us. And so we would internalize it and make it about us. And so we would make meaning of things or have judgments of ourselves. And as an example of that, I was bullied in middle school and high school. And so at that time, I developed a story around if I'm misunderstood, the meaning for that I made of being misunderstood was that I could fail and be rejected, and then I would end up alone. And what happens with our story is that it has served us in many ways and has made us strong. It has protected us in ways, and we've learned how to cope, and um, it helped us to survive in like an emotional way a lot of times, sometimes physically as well. And then we carry that story with us, and it's unconsciously showing up, and we still react to that story that was developed back then today. So we're still reacting to the past today. So even though I may not be bullied now, if when I was working in advertising, if I got an email with like a perceived tone or felt like I was being misunderstood, in my body and my nervous system, it would feel the same as if I was being bullied again. And it felt like there was a real or perceived risk that that would mean that I would fail and be rejected. So a lot of times we're still reacting to the story and the past today. Um,
Mhm.
so we've got the trigger, the story, which then leads to a stress reaction. And just like animals, they go into fight, flight, or freeze mode when they're at physical threat. We
Mm.
have stress reactions that show up when our belonging is at threat. And those are to compete, avoid, and accommodate. The avoid stress reaction is often when we procrastinate. So we can
Mhm.
build things up. We get really overwhelmed to the point where we just can't take action and we put things off. The
Right.
accommodate stress reaction is when we put everybody else's needs ahead of our own, and we want to please people, we want to fix things, be the peacekeeper, and ultimately our own needs fall off of our to-do list. Not always
Right.
everywhere, but in places.
Mhm.
And then the compete stress reaction doesn't necessarily mean we're competitive people, but we tend to compare ourselves to others, and that can
Mm.
be our bodies or skill set. It can also be a current version of ourselves to a past version we can compare to.
Mhm.
Also, in the compete stress reaction, we tend to feel like we're running out of time a lot. So
Mhm.
we feel like we're almost running a marathon, but the finish line just keeps moving. So we try to catch up with it, and we take on more to try to get ahead. But we feel
Mhm.
like we can never catch up, and it's almost like we've got a time, like a clock ticking above our heads. Um, and so from there, we've got a behavior, and the behavior depends on the person and is basically a lot of those things that I talked through with each of the stress reactions. And
Right.
then we lose self trust. We eat
Mhm.
out of alignment with our goals, and then it loops back into the trigger.
Right.
So I wanted to share that because as you were talking about how there's about questioning yourself and asking if you're capable, my guess is that that's part of your story that's coming up. And then
Mm.
if and I'm just gonna draw some conclusions here. I don't know if this is exactly what's happening for you, but just from
Mhm.
what you've shared so far, this is what it sounds like is there's the story, which then may lead to that comparison in some cases,
Right.
where it's like comparing to other people, and then you lose self-trust. You may have that emotional eating or say screw it from going to the gym, and then it loops back into the trigger and it's like, but am I capable enough? Right? So it's
Mhm.
just like it
It's like
like
a cycle, just yeah, it's like a
exactly.
circle.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so within that too, with those stress reactions, then there's a protective side of yourself, which we get into. There's so many different layers, but there's a protective side that when you're in that stress reaction or your story is that protective side of you that doesn't necessarily feel protective, that
Right.
is questioning yourself, right? And is saying like, how could you not be consistent, or like just kind of that negative self-talk that tends to come up
Mhm.
is a result of that as well.
Mhm. Makes sense.
So I know that's a lot, but any questions about that or any other parts of that that resonate?
No, it's just like I feel like everything you're saying is kind of like hitting like the nail on the head. Yeah.
So with that um the cycle,
Mhm.
does it help to be able to see parts of that and to relate that to some of the patterns and the behaviors that show up, and does that provide any a little bit of like maybe not complete clarity, but does it give you an idea of like why this is happening or why it happens sometimes?
Yes, definitely. Like even like when you say like the avoiding, I will keep avoiding until I'm like I will like start like, doing like for example, start doing like things for the dogs that I could do later. We have two dogs. So, I'll be like, okay, I'll do that later. Or, oh, let me do this first, or let me do that for somebody else, right? Until it's like, okay, like you kind of have to go now, right? Like I actually really do enjoy when I'm at the gym. I love swimming. I absolutely, it's for me, swimming, I kind of use it as a form of meditation. I love being by water.
Mhm.
So I love that. I do like my weights. I love kickboxing as well. Like I like those things. It's not that I hate the gym. I don't. I do enjoy it and I feel so, so much better. It's just that getting to,
Mhm.
so it's like I will keep on kind of like avoiding it,
Mhm.
until like I have to force myself. And then once I'm there, it's fine. I love it. And I actually feel part of myself completing that, right? Um, with the competing part, like you were saying, yes, you start to compete like physically with others, which then makes you, because it makes you feel guilty or shameful or whatever, then it makes you feel like, okay, am I not good enough? And then which leads to, oh, am I not good enough in like, whatever my field is, right? Because
Mhm.
it's like everything you're saying, it resonates. And I feel like I can be the biggest procrastinator ever. It's like I will procrastinate because I feel like I work better under pressure. And that's just how it's always been. And with the imposter syndrome, I feel like I've had that my whole life.
Mhm.
And even like some of the people around me, some of my friends, even friends that are in like the similar industry, and I'm talking about back home. I don't know too many people here. Like I just moved, so well, not just, but it's been a couple of months. Still kind of trying to find my ground. I don't work right now, because of like the whole paperwork process. So it's I'm still trying to, I don't know how to say, like make this my home in a way, and it's
Mhm.
taking a lot of a lot, so all of that kind of thing, definitely has, some effect on all of this that I am
Mhm.
feeling.
Yep.
Yes, like the loneliness, of course, I
Mhm.
miss home. I miss the there, I had my life going, I had everything, I was working with people, I had my clients, and it's like I'm now here, and it's like kind of like starting from all over again. Of course, I have my husband and his family and everything. They're all great, but it's really important to, I feel like, have your own social circle and that kind of stuff too.
Mhm.
So yeah, and it's definitely a culture shock, even though it's Canada and the US. There's a lot of differences as well. And as in when you're new or an outsider, you pick up on a lot of things.
Mhm.
So all of that I feel like adds to it. And
Mhm.
then there is that pressure of having a baby and all of that, which is like, oh my gosh, like time is flying by. Like you're saying, there's like, you feel like that timeline, and
Mhm.
wanting to lose weight like my whole life. Now it feels like, oh my gosh, I gotta do this. I gotta do this, like I have to be the best in the best health before I bring a child into this world, right? Like I want to be physically healthy, so I don't pass on anything or anything like that. To It's just a lot of pressure.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah. And
Mm.
I can totally relate to what you're talking about with feeling like you're starting fresh, which starting over in a new country and having like your husband's support system. My husband and I moved
Mm-hmm.
to Australia in 2013,
No,
and same thing, like it's English speaking, it is across the
right.
world, but culturally it was a big culture shock even for my husband. But I felt the same
Mm-hmm.
way where I felt really alone and lonely, even though his family was there and his friends and everything, and I had that support system. It felt like it was his support system, even though they supported
Right.
me, but it just wasn't the same as like my friends I had been friends with for 10 or 15 years, right? Like, so I
Mm-hmm.
totally get that. And that's
Yes.
exactly it too with like that trigger is even though we can have a great support system around us, we can still
Mm-hmm.
feel isolated, alone, or lonely in different
Right.
ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was also curious too with and also just like everything that you talked about, that is a lot, right? Like you have you're going through a lot of changes with moving away from your support system, moving away from your client base, and not
Mm-hmm.
working right now while you're getting your paperwork, and also culturally. And that's where we're talking about like this risk or like where we may feel unsafe is even though
Right.
physically you may not feel unsafe, it is there's a lot of uncertainty. There is a lot of it's a big transition
Mm-hmm.
where there can feel like that emotional lack of safety in some
Mm-hmm.
ways, which then can lead us to not care. Because if there's times where you are feeling like, if we think about everything that you just laid out, right, of like comparing to other people and then thinking about, oh my God, I have to get on track and like get healthy so I can have a baby. I'm running out of time. And then I should go to the gym, but I don't really want to. And am I capable of doing this work? It's like, who cares about the food? Right. Or like,
Right.
why go to the gym? Like, I'm exhausted. So,
Yeah. Like some days, like you feel so like because you're mentally exhausted, you feel physically exhausted,
mhm,
because you just feel like
weighed
I just
down.
need,
Right.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
And it's like with being married, like now, like there back home, everybody knew me, right? Like they knew Pravinder. But now I'm in this new place. They don't know me that well, right? Now, being a daughter-in-law with culture, like with our culture, there's a lot of responsibilities and the way you're supposed to be. And you can't just be like that free, like da 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 da.
Mhm.
You have like you're the oldest daughter-in-law, and there's a lot. Don't get me wrong, like of course it's a good thing too, but it's a lot of pressure too, and then the pressure from my in-laws and then my own parents of having a baby. Like it's like I just got married, just made the big move. Like it's a lot, and oh
Yeah.
yeah.
What so there's two things I wanted to ask about with that and then also going back to the gym, which we'll come back. I'll pause for the gym and come back to that in a bit.
Mhm.
But if we think about and I know it's a lot of it's a lot because culturally there's a lot of pressure, and I think that that comes up a lot is like you get married, you have a kid, then you have a kid, and it's
Yeah,
like when's the next kid coming? But
right, yeah.
and so if we think like some of that can be like wanting to please those around us, of course, so that we fit in and belong and have that acceptance, right? If we think about finding the in this case, I don't know if it's necessarily the win-win, but if we think about like it can feel like you're out of choice if it's not necessarily something that you really want. And also when you're talking about feeling like there's a lot of responsibility, and when you said you can't just be free to be who you are, that is
Hmm.
really exhausting too, right? Because there's these
Right.
expectations where you're trying to fit into this mold and you may not even know what the expectations or the mold are. And so
Hmm.
it's like constantly questioning of like, am I being accepted? And this is again where it's like this risk of like, am I being accepted or am I not? And this like push and pull that can really like almost close in on us or like really feel like a lot to take on. And so if what do you feel like the risk is if you were to just be free in who you are?
I don't know, maybe like be judged for it, because like I think I do tend to be a person who will speak their mind in a way like I will stand behind something that I believe in. I'm not gonna just say yes to say yes. So, but then there is also like that wanting to people please too.
Mhm.
So I think the biggest thing would probably be like judgment, or how I'll be perceived. Um, yeah.
So if that risk wasn't real, in
Mhm.
terms of being judged by your in-laws or your parents, what would you choose?
To be myself. And just, this this is who I am. Yeah.
And what is the gap or the difference between who you are and being yourself and how you're currently showing up in the relationships right now?
The gap. I think it's definitely the uncertainty because I'm still trying to get to know everyone. Of course, I know my own family, right? But here, there's so many new people that I'm meeting, and it's a big family on my husband's side too. But it's still like it's kind of like treading in water in a way. I don't know. That's how it feels like, and you don't know. Like sometimes the waves kind of go over your head, and then sometimes you're above them. I don't know if I'm like making sense,
Mhm.
but that's what it feels like.
Can you think about a time where you felt like the wave was over your head versus when you were above them and what the difference was in those situations?
Hmm. I think when it's like me and my husband, like when we're at our own house because we understand each other, he he gets me. I feel confident, But then sometimes if it's like um with his family or outside somewhere or and then there's like a judgment made based on me or because they don't know me properly, then it kind of makes you feel less than in a way. Mm, yeah. And I also like I do feel like because I've always been very independent, I've always worked and always it was always school and work or now that I'm not working, it feels like I feel like a burden in a way on my husband. And I understand, like, he's very reassuring, and he's like, well, you can't right now, right? But and I also feel very confused. I don't know like where to start here, to be honest, Laura. Like I don't know, like I have that education there, I have all of that. I had like I was actually teaching in a private college there as well, so it's like I had all of that set. All of a sudden, I'm in a new country and I don't really know. Like, I feel lost. I don't know where to begin. So I don't know. There's a lot of like I don't feel like at my peak. Even, it's like, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot, and there's so much uncertainty, right, between, like, not knowing where to start, and, like, there's so many layers here, and this is where when I started out talking about how our eating is a symptom, does it kinda make sense as to why it's been challenging to be consistent with your
Mhm.
eating?
Yeah. I'm so sorry.
No, that's alright.
Yeah.
We don't often we live with this and we think about it a lot and it's constantly going through our head, but we also don't have carve out we don't necessarily have this space and time to really like
Mhm.
process and think
Right.
through what's going on. A lot of times we're more self-critical than we are aware of what's happening. And so
Mhm.
it's not uncommon for
Mhm.
the emotion to come up when we're thinking through a lot of this and processing it.
Right.
And we
Mhm.
can chat afterwards about some places to start because I can share some in terms of the industry. We can chat about that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just feel so lost. Like, I don't know. I'm like, what do I fix? Like, do I fix my eating? Do I fix my weight? Do I it's like it's like everything all at once in a
Hmm.
way, and it's hard to explain because it's like it's like North America. Like, it's not like I'm coming from, like, you know, a very different environment. It's not, but there's still changes, even though they're very similar countries, but
Yeah.
they're also very different.
Yeah. For sure. I mean,
Yeah.
culturally, even like politically, healthcare
Yes.
wise, probably our banking system is different. Like there's so many
Everything.
different things.
Temperature, miles, kilometers, even.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yes.
If you think about too, like it's like your stability and, like, your foundation has
Mhm.
completely been disrupted, right, by
Yes.
moving here, and so,
Mhm.
like, if you had just gotten married, that would be one like, one thing that can be uncertain in a transition to begin with. If you had just
Right.
moved to another country, which that in and of itself, I think even moving anywhere, moving to a different city, a different state can be challenging too, but especially when you're going to a different country,
Mhm.
that is rocks our foundation, and then stepping away from temporarily your career and having to start over in a new country, in a new place, that is
Mhm.
also a big challenge,
Right.
and then you're also trying to fit in and get to know this other support system and part of your family that you don't really know, which can feel really uncertain and to be really challenging too.
Right.
And so, typically what tends to happen is when I work with my clients, we the weight piece tends to be a side effect of doing the
Mhm.
work on like what on revising our story. So a lot of what we're doing throughout the process is first we get clear on what your story is and then we work on revising and rewriting that and seeing how a lot of like the bad habits with our eating, exercise, all of that, how that again is a symptom. And so with where to start, it's like you know what to do about around your eating typically, right? So it's
Right.
why is it that you're not being as consistent with it? And what is actually taking you off track beyond just willpower and discipline? Because you are a very disciplined person. You are a very motivated person, right? Like you have had this
Mhm.
career, you had your clients, you've been successful. And so
Right.
it's why is that why has that been a challenge? And we look at what we call instead of like a lot of times in self-development and personal development, people are like, you have to get really clear on your why. We're actually looking on the why not. So why are you
Mhm.
not going to the gym? Why are you not eating consistently? Why are you emotionally eating and turning to food and stuff? And so as we work through a lot of that stuff, then the eating tends to fall into place and clear up. And then the weight loss ends up being a side effect of that. And I don't promise weight loss in my programs.
Of
However,
course.
it can happen for people, for some of my clients as they're going through the process as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I don't know if that's helpful in terms of like where to start and not suggest like it depends on what feels
Mhm.
right for you, and like
Mhm.
the right first step. But
Mhm.
wanted to share that insight of what
Thank you.
the way I work with people.
Right. No, it does make sense because it's like, okay, the why not is kind of like, okay, why is it? Like, in a way, it is control, right? Like, why is it out of control? And how can I bring it? I don't like to use the word control because I feel like it has like a negative connotation to it.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, then how can I make uh, in a way, what can I do to benefit me, right? Like to put a positive twist. Okay, so how can I make it better, right? If I'm doing this, why not? Then how?
Mhm.
I don't know if that makes sense what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Right? Like, so okay, so what is it that I can do that will help me? And then again, I know it again, it's hard to be consistent. That's
Mhm.
the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when we feel like things are out of control, it really is more that we're out of choice. And I think
Mm.
back to when you were talking about how you feel this pressure of, now that you're married, having a baby, and
Mhm.
also like having to be on instead of necessarily yourself when you're around your in-laws and your husband's
Mhm.
family and stuff. And that is more out of being out of choice than it, which then leads us to feeling out of control, maybe in life, but then that shows up in certain places of our life, not in life in general, that then shows
Right.
up around, and it is, we feel out of control with our bodies, our weight, and food often as a result of feeling out of control or out of choice in other places.
Mhm.
One thing I wanted to just ask, and then we'll wrap up and we can, yeah, we'll wrap up, is thinking back to the gym, when you were talking about how you feel a lot of really great benefits once you're there, and there's activities and exercises that you enjoy doing, but it's a matter of getting there. Is there, when you think about going, what feels, when thinking about like the resistance that comes up, because we've
Right.
talked about some of like the comparison that shows up or having some of like the self-doubt, does any of that tend to show up around the gym as well? Before, like, is there a build up, or how do you build up going to the gym?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like a judgment too, in a way, because it's like, okay, when I'm gonna go and lift weight, what if somebody's like, oh, you know, oh, she must be new, or which I'm not. I'm not new to the gym or weightlifting or any parts of the gym, but it's still like I feel so new to it for some reason in my head. But then
Hmm.
I go there and it's just fine. That's what's been coming up a lot. Maybe it's because I feel new here. I don't know.
Hmm.
Um, and it's like I don't know. Like I'm still learning the area and everything. So yeah, I would say it's that for sure that shows up.
And so, if you're new, what do you make it mean about you if you are there lifting weights and people see you and are like, what is she doing here? She's new to this.
I don't know. Maybe in my head I'm like, oh, what if they're like laughing at me or something, or I don't know, like yeah, or like when I am like, bending or something, and I'm like, oh my gosh. It's more of my own judgment, honestly, than it is of somebody else because it's in my own head when I'm like looking at myself, I'm like, oh my gosh, you gotta lose this. But if I was probably kinder to myself in that moment, and saying, hey, at least, you showed up. So be like, thank yourself for showing up today, right? You are here, which means you do care. And it's this was built over time. It's not gonna just go away, right?
Right.
So mhm,
And what do you value? And yeah, so a lot of times we can, when thinking about the judgment, it can feel like we might be seen or exposed or something that, and this is where, again, it's like the why not? Like, why are you not going to the gym? Because you know it feels good, you know what to do. There's these things that you enjoy. You do feel good once you've gone. But this is where you feel the risk, and this is where that resistance comes in of, but what if I'm judged? And even though it's like the judgment of yourself, there's also that risk of being judged by others. And also, why would you want to go and beat yourself up too, right? Like if you're sitting
Yeah.
there, look at yourself in the mirror and like picking yourself apart, that doesn't feel good either.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, what do you value around going to the gym, movement? Like, what's important to you about the gym?
What is important to me? I think it's the way that I come out of the gym. It's that, um, like that feeling of my body feels light. I feel happier. I think that is definitely what I value, and when I'm in the water and I'm just like, I try to be, I try to connect with myself, or just, I'm doing a backstroke or whatever, and I'm just closing my eyes and just being like grateful for the moment or whatever I am, the good and the bad that I am going through. I think that that's kind of important for me,
Yeah.
because I find it so hard for me at home to just sit. Like, I have all these apps, I have everything. I'm like, okay, I'm up early, I'm gonna meditate, but then, like, the doggies are there, or I just can't. Like, I'm still like, we're still trying to settle into our home here, so just don't feel like I have that proper space to just connect. Whereas at home, in my home, I did have that, right? Like, I had my own space, like my own room, or we had like our own gym at home where I could do that. So I don't know if I'm making sense. Like, I'm just
Mhm.
talking.
No, it makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. So it's
Okay.
really, beyond just like movement, strength, weight loss. Going to the gym is a really, like, what's really important to you is the connection with yourself. It sounds like,
Right. Hmm.
and like clearing your mind and having space for yourself.
Right. Hmm.
So if you think about that and grounding into that, does that shift how, and you may not know the answer right now, but does that shift how you think about or feel about the gym?
Yes. When I do think of it like that, what you just said, like, yeah, I see it as like a positive place now. All of a sudden, in this very moment, as you ask that question, it's like, oh, hey, that's where, in a way, I do feel safe,
Mhm.
right? Yeah.
And so maybe because it's, that was about around the pool, right? So what
Hmm.
will create that safety for you with like lifting weights? Or, and so like what is it in some
Hmm.
of those other places, or kickboxing, some of the other activities that you enjoy doing, are those
Hmm.
also places to connect with yourself um and to have some of that space for yourself? Or is there other, is there something else maybe that you value or that's important to you in some of those other areas of the gym outside of the pool as well?
I think it would take some time, you know. Um, yeah, it, it like when I do go and I actually do, I don't know, maybe like building connections, but it's hard. Everybody's working out, doing their own thing. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know how to answer that one.
No, and it's, you may not have the answer right now, but something to think about for when you do
Hmm.
go is like, how can you create that sense of safety? And
Right,
one way may even be like, what if this risk of judgment isn't real? What would I choose, or what's important to me when
right.
you go to work out as well?
Hmm. Which is true. It's actually a lot of it is in my head, and I know that, but it's like, how do I make myself believe that? Yeah.
sometimes it's just testing even, right? To see and like maybe going into that space. And I remember one time I was going to a gender reveal party, and beforehand I was thinking about the food that was going to be there, and I was really focused on like, oh, what am I going to eat? And I was like, wait a second, why am I thinking about the food? And I had already been doing this work for a little while, so
Right.
I thought about it and I was like, oh, I'm not going to know anybody there. There's a risk that I could feel misunderstood. And then I thought about,
Mhm.
but why am I going to this gender reveal party? What is really important to me, and how do I want this to end?
Right.
And just thinking about like, oh, I'm going to support my friend and to celebrate the baby. What ended up happening is I didn't thinking about that. I didn't end up thinking about the food. I barely ate anything while I was there, and not because I was resisting the food, it just happened.
Mhm.
And I even
Mhm.
found myself in the middle of the party, standing in the back of the room, kind of in the middle of the room, looking around, and I was like, I am standing here by myself and nobody is noticing. Nobody is paying attention and nobody cares. And I was
Oh,
like, all of this that I had built up of like, oh my God, I could be misunderstood because I'm alone and people are going to think I'm a loser or whatever I was thinking about,
right.
right? When I just stood back for a second and took it in, I was like, nobody cares. Nobody even knows
Yeah.
I'm here. And it was really
Mhm.
freeing to be able to recognize that. So it may
Right.
even be just like thinking about of like what's important to you when you go to the gym, and then maybe testing and
Mhm.
standing back and being like, is anybody even noticing?
So the other day, this actually happened with me last week. Our gym was hosting like it was called it was like yoga and wine kind of
Uh-huh.
a thing session, and so I saw it kind of like last minute. I saw it on my app, and I'm like, oh my God, I was gonna go to the gym. I was gonna go first, go. I don't know which class I was about to go to, but then I saw that, so I'm like, oh my gosh, this is gonna be so much more fun. Like, come on, like vinyasa and vino, it sounded so cool, and I'm like, hey, I might be able to meet people, and it's gonna be so exciting. And I built all that up in my head. So I go there. I had a great time during the actual yoga part of it. I do enjoy doing yoga. So, it was great. It was outdoor. It was like the sun was setting, it was by the pool. It was just so beautiful. I felt so great. And then like the wine part came, and then everybody, there was some food there too. So we're all just kind of grabbing food, but I just felt so alone because it seemed like everybody had their kind of like little cliques, kind of like groups. I kind of again felt like an outsider, and I don't know why, like, I got so sensitive about it. I was trying to talk, so the wine was like, one of the wineries hosting it. So I was, of course, talking to, like, the owner, and that's pretty much it, who I was talking to. And then I came home, and, like, I remember it just being really, really sad and, like, honestly, like, a shitty experience. And I came home and I told my husband, like, "Oh, like, that was really great, but I just, like," I think I even cried. Like, I was like, "Why are you feeling so sensitive? Like, what is wrong with you?" And I talked to my best friend, and I was like, "I just feel like an outsider, and it just doesn't feel good." I don't know why was I so sensitive about it? Like, why did it hurt so much? I don't understand. Like, these people don't know me. They don't owe me anything. They don't owe to talk to me. Like, I was trying to kind of go and talk, but everybody just seemed like they have their little groups, right? So I don't know. Just mm,
Yeah, my guess is that it triggered your story, which we would explore, but also it also seems like if you're feeling like an outsider in general right now because you're in a new state, city,
environment.
country,
Hmm.
even with like your husband's family and stuff, like it sounds like there may be a little bit, even though it may not be as much of an outsider, it still may be a little bit isolating. And then going to that event was like, see, you are an outsider, right? Like it's almost like a reminder of how you're feeling more
Hmm.
broadly, maybe. Um, yeah, it's challenging, especially like in a big group of people where people already have their networks and stuff. It can be really challenging to create some of those connections as well.
Mhm. I just felt like a loser at the end of it, like, ugh, and I'm like, "I don't like this feeling."
Mhm.
Yeah,
How are
so
you feeling right now from talking through everything? And do you feel like you have, I know we didn't really necessarily talk about like specific action items that you can take, but do you feel like you have a couple of things to take with you, to reflect on, to work toward, like to think about um, moving forward?
mhm. Yes, for sure. I think there are, some of the why nots, for sure. I think I can kinda see, like, what I need to work on, like, why am I feeling it's like it's r it's really easy, like you said, to on a day-to-day basis, like, knowing, "Okay, this is what I'm going through, these are the changes or challenges as well," right? But then to actually think about, "Okay, why am I feeling like this?" It is there's a reason, right? There's so much uncertainty right now, so that is also triggering all of the things that I am feeling. But then I'm also very much like, yes, but then how are you going to control it, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
And is control the one thing? Is it like, even though you're craving control, is that the solution? Or is it more of um, within the uncertainty, there's only so much, like, there's a lot of things that we don't know or that we can't necessarily control. But with
Mm,
the things that you can control in your life and within your sphere and your world,
mm,
are there things there that you can focus on or ground into? And I think even like one thing that we talked about is like that safe space that you feel in the pool. And is that something that you can create like a routine around, or, that can create a little bit of certainty? So I guess like
mhm.
anywhere that you can, that you do have certainty, is there anywhere that you can ground into that, create more certainty where you can,
Mhm.
could be helpful to think about too.
Right. Got you. It's just like when I do, like for me, like even for going to the pool, I just feel like I need to work out too. Like if I go to the pool, just the pool, then I feel still guilty. Like I don't feel like, oh, I properly worked out. For me, it's like because I enjoy it, I feel like you're not working hard enough. Like
Mhm.
in my mind, it's like you have to work hard enough. Like you have to sweat to give yourself that credit. If I go just to the pool, it's just like, oh, it's like a chill time. Mm. Even though of course my body's moving, I am working out, but it doesn't my mind doesn't think of it that way. I don't know why that is.
It makes me think of the saying, "No pain, no gain," right? Is
Yeah.
it's like there's this
Mhm.
belief that you have to sweat or be in pain or like work out
Right.
harder and harder. But that's too where, I mean, if we think about, first of all, our bodies need recovery and rest as well, and also a mix of activity and is really beneficial too. And
Mhm.
so if we think about that, and because like that is a safe space and it is a place for you to get some movement, but also have that space to clear your mind, is it necessary for you to be working out really hard every time you go to the gym? Or is it okay to have that space and be able um, to have like a routine at the gym where you carve it out for something that feels like you're choosing versus feeling like what's going to get you ahead, if that makes sense.
Right. No, it does make sense. It's just I need to accept it, like within myself, right? Like I do have a routine for the gym that I don't always follow, of course. Again, the consistency, right? Um, but yeah. Mhm.
Well, I feel like we could keep chatting. Like I could
Yes.
keep
Mhm.
going. There's so much more I
I
want to dig
know it's
into.
yeah,
Um, but we'll wrap up here, and then
sure.
thank you so much for being vulnerable, for sharing all of this. I think a lot of people will be able to relate to what you have shared.
Mhm.
And so I really appreciate that.
And thank you so much for listening.
Of
You know?
course.